All right, so Joe Manchin, the corrupt millionaire coal baron from the state of West Virginia, is back at it again. I guess that he decided that tearing up Build Back Better into a million pieces wasn't good enough for him. He's now come out and officially stated that he is not even in favor of picking out individual portions of Build Back Better in order to pass as standalone bills. So here from Common Dreams, we have a little bit more on the specifics from Jake Johnson. He says, nothing short of a death sentence, fury as Manchin tanks climate spending. So what exactly are they talking about here? They say Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia informed Democratic leaders on Thursday that he will not support any new climate spending or tax increases targeting the wealthy and large corporations, sinking his party's revived push for renewable energy investments and further undercutting the country's ability to rein in carbon emissions. So first off, before we get into any of the blatant and obvious corruption that Joe Manchin puts on full display on a regular basis, this already is in complete contradiction to what he was saying in the aftermath of him tearing apart Build Back Better. So just as a little bit of a reminder on that, here from GrantThornton.com, he says Manchin, in a radio interview, outlined the type of package that he would accept, saying that he still supported tax changes to ensure that, quote, everybody paid their fair share, the ultra super wealthy and the corporations that weren't paying anything. So basically, I guess one of the problems that he had with Build Back Better is that number one, he was operating with the false premise that Build Back Better spending was going to somehow worsen inflation. That's not what the primary causes of inflation have been. They have primarily been driven by things like supply chain breakdowns due to the fact that we don't manufacture shit in the United States anymore, and we rely on foreign supply chains that broke down during the pandemic. And number two, as a primary driver of inflation, has been straight up corporate price gouging, where according to at least Matt Stoller and his breakdown that we've covered on this channel a million times by this point, upwards of over 60% of inflation is single-handedly attributable to these wealthy corporations price gouging the American people, artificially raising their prices beyond what supply-side increased cost would dictate, and basically just ripping us off while they are making record profits. So you look at a situation like this where he was saying that his opposition to Build Back Better was, number one, that it would raise inflation, which is 100% false. If anything, it would have reduced inflationary pressures on the American people with things like lowering healthcare costs, lowering prescription drug costs, free childcare, free universal pre-K, free community college, etc. All things that would actually reduce inflationary pressures that average working class people are facing, and it would pay for it by increasing taxes on the wealthy. So should have been something that, according to Manchin's stated economic position on Build Back Better, that he would have been fully in favor of. But nonetheless, if this is his justification for not being in favor of Build Back Better as a whole, you would think that at least this guy, given what he's saying right here, that he supports taxes on the ultra super wealthy and corporations, you would think that he would be in favor of raising taxes on the rich in order to make some of these investments. But no, he's now coming out and basically saying that he is fully in favor of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which of course disproportionately went to the wealthiest Americans. So here from Vox, just as a reminder on that part of it, the Republican tax bill got worse. Now the top 1% gets 83% of the gains, and in its last year, the bill will raise taxes on more than 53% of Americans. I'll let you guys guess exactly which portion of the population this 53% of Americans getting a tax raise is going to be. I mean, surprise, surprise, you look at the data here, and they break it down by color and year. So blue is 2018, red is 2025, orange is 2027. And you can see here, I mean, obviously the lowest earners in the United States saw the least amount of benefits from this tax cut. The wealthiest, top 5%, top 1%, top 0.1%, saw by far the largest gains in their income savings that aren't going to taxes. So again, disproportionately benefited the wealthy in an immediate term. But then if you look at this 2027 orange bar, you'll see that the lowest quintile and the lowest second quintile are actually seeing tax increases by 2027 as a result of this legislation, while the top 5%, the top 1%, the top 0.1% are all seeing still maintained tax cuts at 2027. So obviously, him coming out and saying that he is in favor of keeping the Trump tax cuts in place is in direct contradiction to his own statements last year in December. So just completely ridiculous and obviously blatantly corrupt and inconsistent with his own statements. But that's basically been the entirety of the Build Back Better negotiations. The entirety of the Biden administration has just been Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, handful of other corporate Democrats, basically just stringing Joe Biden along, fucking with him as he continues to refuse to publicly confront the members of his own party who are eviscerating his agenda. But nonetheless, we continue with some details here from Jake. He says, while Manchin's refusal to endorse green energy funding may have been entirely foreseeable, given his close ties to the fossil fuel industry and his role in taking Build Back Better just months earlier, climate advocates nevertheless voiced dismay at the power one individual has been able to exert over a process with implications for literally billions of people across the planet. And we got a quote here from the Sunrise Movement saying, "This is nothing short of a death sentence. Our democracy is broken when one man who profits from the fossil fuel industry can defy the 81 million Americans who voted for Democrats to stop the climate crisis. It's clear appealing to corporate obstructionists doesn't work, and it will cost us a generation of voters." So again, just one thing on the seemingly infinite string of policies that Biden could try to deploy to gain back a lot of the lost support that he's lost from young voters specifically. Vast disproportionate amount of his trailing off approval rating has been caused by young voters bailing on him, and it's because of shit like this. I mean, you're not even looking out for our future in any way, shape, or form. You are letting a millionaire coal baron eviscerate the potentially last chance that we actually have to invest in addressing climate change. So it's obviously dangerous and pathetic on so many different levels. But they continue here saying, the Washington Post, the first outlet to report on the West Virginia Democrats' stance, noted that party leaders had already agreed to surrender their most prized spending proposals, from offering paid family and medical leave to providing child care, free pre-K, tax benefits to low-income Americans, in a bid to win Manchin's support, which is necessary to get a reconciliation package through the Senate. And they got a quote here saying, in more recent talks, the Post added, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and his colleagues set about trying to woo the longtime holdout over a scaled-back approach, including tax credits to spur clean energy, incentives to encourage the purchase of electric vehicles, and limited penalties on producers of harmful methane gas. So understand, I mean, it's not even like they were just sitting back and trying to get Joe Manchin to agree with like the Green New Deal or even 5% of the Green New Deal. They're talking about like pathetic, watered down half measures that wouldn't even go remotely close to actually addressing climate change in the ways that we need to right now. But I mean, even this half-assed approach somehow was too much for Joe Manchin. So just again, the corruption is very blatant and out in your face. But just to remind you guys, in terms of Joe Manchin's history with the coal industry specifically, but the fossil fuel industry more broadly, I will link this down below if you want to go read through this entire Intercept breakdown. But I've talked about this on my channel a number of different times. Basically, you can trace back Joe Manchin's coal corruption since he was a state senator in West Virginia, where he basically, in a very corrupt way, helped to get his own personal financial interests benefiting from a dirty coal company in West Virginia. He then proceeded to rip off his own constituents by raising their energy prices, basically just took advantage of them, and now he is a senator representing West Virginia, and he's continuing to do the exact same goddamn thing, condemning millions or billions of people around the world in the process. But very extensive corruption record when it comes to Joe Manchin in West Virginia. But just another point here on the tax cuts, which I think is also important from an economic framing position, because, Joe Manchin wants to come out and he wants to pretend as if inflation is because we spent too much and we gave too much stimulus to working class people. Has nothing to do with corporate price gouging, has nothing to do with the corporate tax cuts that he is now apparently fully in favor of. But you also have the added economic consequences of just rich people, wealthy people, high income earners straight up avoiding their tax payments. So here from Newsweek, they say more than $160 billion lost annually from wealthiest Americans not paying taxes. This alone could have paid for free community college, okay? $160 billion. And this is not talking about, how much wealthy people or people with high incomes should be paying in a fair tax bracket system. This is just talking about $160 billion lost on a yearly basis because the IRS has been so thoroughly gutted by conservatives like Joe Manchin and others within the Republican Party that they don't even have the fucking resources to audit and make sure that these rich people are actually paying the taxes that they owe. So we're talking about potentially, if you include this in just straight up unpaid taxes, along with where the tax brackets should be in terms of income and wealth in this country, we're talking about like hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in lost revenue that could be used to pay for a lot of these things that Manchin says cannot be paid for. And we're losing hundreds of billions of dollars a year because he is more willing to protect this current corrupt tax bracket than he is to actually do the thing that he is claiming he believes in, and raising taxes on these wealthy individuals, high income earners, in order to get a lot of this shit done. But I mean, it's not a mystery. We know exactly why he doesn't want to raise taxes on the wealthy. He represents the wealthy, and we know why he opposes climate change initiatives. It's because he is massively corrupt and has direct financial stakes in the fossil fuel industry. But also another layer to that, Manchin has taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than anyone else in Washington, D.C. Anyone else. And he says, and the return on that investment has been enormous. Big oil got its money worth 1,000 times over at least. And again, back to the economic side of climate change this time. I mean, when you want to talk about the potential cost of investing in renewable energies, okay, nothing. There is no amount that has been proposed even by the most radical socialist Bernie Sanders, AOC, fear-mongering conservative mindset, embodiment of what it means to invest in climate change. You could take the most extreme proposals that are on the table, the Green New Deal, and it would not even come remotely close to being as expensive or costly as allowing climate change to continue on the current trajectory. Okay, so that's something you have to understand, is that even when it comes down to just simple economic calculations here, Joe Manchin coming out and saying we can't afford to invest in climate change is fucking bullshit, because no matter how much we invest in climate change, you could invest $1 trillion a year on climate change, and it literally would not be enough to offset the costs of inaction on climate change, as Joe Manchin is trying to ensure happens right now. So, I mean, even on the economic front, on the political front, obviously deeply unpopular to not tackle climate change, especially among the constituents that Joe Biden needs to be trying to bring back into the coalition right now. But also, again, from the economic front, I mean, any front you want to look at this from, Joe Manchin is very clearly in the wrong here. But finally, they finish off here saying the closure for now of the legislative path towards climate action spurred fresh calls for Joe Biden to do everything that he can through executive action. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island tweeted late Thursday that it's now time for executive beast mode from the president, who has thus far resisted pressure to declare a climate emergency and take other steps to mobilize federal resources to combat a crisis whose deadly consequences are becoming more evident by the day. And they say in a press release, the Sunrise Movement basically put together a list of things that he could do from his position as the president. They say end the practice of leasing public lands and waters to fossil fuel production, stop the issue of permits for any new fossil fuel infrastructure, including pipelines, petrochemical plants, and export terminals, especially Line 3, Line 5, and the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Now, some conservatives would push back on that and say, well, this is why we have high gas prices right now. No, that is 100% false. Chevron, Exxon, Shell, BP, all of these big oil corporations are making record profits right now, and they're making record profits because they're price gouging you at the gas pump, okay? The last time that on the global oil markets, oil prices were at roughly the price that they are right now, the cost of gasoline was not $5 a gallon, okay? It was like roughly around $3.50 a gallon. So the gap between that is literally just these fossil fuel companies deciding to take advantage of this moment to price gouge you. And also they're setting on thousands and thousands of permits that are unused right now. So this would not affect gas prices in any meaningful way. If anything, it would help in the long run to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, so that maybe we won't have to pay for gas in the future if that's the direction that we want to go. But they continue saying that he could declare a climate emergency. He could also update and strengthen outdated standards limiting particulate matter, ozone, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, mercury, coal ash, and tailpipe emissions, as well as lead and copper rules preventing contamination of drinking water. He could finalize new methane standards for new and existing oil and gas operations and make these standards strong enough to cut methane pollution at least 65% below 2012 levels by 2025. And he could direct the EPA to designate greenhouse pollutants as criteria air pollutants and set a science-based national pollution cap under the Clean Air Act. So, I mean, that's the type of stuff that he could be doing from the executive level, but at the end of the day, in order to actually meaningfully address climate change, you do have to pass legislation. And so for him to be able to do that, he would have to be willing to go out and confront the corruption of the one member within his own party who is seemingly against investing in climate change, Joe Manchin, and would have to run a public campaign against him and expose him for these corrupt ties that he has to the fossil fuel industry, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from them on a regular basis, on top of the fact that he has personal financial ties with his own coal company in West Virginia. So you'd have to talk about these things. You'd have to make these public. You'd have to run a relentless pressure campaign. You would have to use the whipping stick. You would have to actually use like an FDR style approach to handling the presidency. But based on what we've seen so far throughout the entirety of the Biden administration, not only is he not willing to do that, but he's not even really to come out and publicly condemn Manchin in any way, shape, or form, let alone go out and actually publicly expose his corruption and the real reasons why he is opposed to climate change spending and increasing taxes on the wealthy.